What if you could turn your passion for music, well, not just a passion, but turn it into a, what, $7.3 billion fortune?
It sounds almost unbelievable, right?
Exactly. And what if you could build this massive $17 billion empire without singing a single note yourself,
Yeah.
without ever stepping on a stage or, even really wanting the spotlight?
Yeah, that's the contradiction at the heart of it, and yet that's precisely what Daniel Ek did.
He's the quiet architect, isn't he?
Yeah.
Behind Spotify, this global streaming powerhouse. I mean, $17 billion valuation, used by over 675 million people now. Just staggering numbers.
Absolutely staggering, and it's woven into so many people's daily lives.
But the story, it doesn't start there, does it? It starts with like a teenage coder from Stockholm.
Just a quiet kid, apparently completely obsessed with tech.
And crucially, allergic to the spotlight, allergic to fanfare. Just wanted to build things.
Right. A world away from the image of the modern tech mogul sometimes.
So the big question is, how did he actually do it? What kind of thinking, what sort of, quiet determination and disruptive vision turns that silence into such massive influence and turns solving a problem into, well, a fortune?
That's what makes his story so compelling to unpack.
So today, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're taking a deep dive into the, let's call it, quiet genius of Daniel Ek. Our mission here is to really understand the hidden mindsets, the intricate strategies, and maybe the surprisingly simple habits behind one of the world's most successful billionaires.
And importantly, trying to do it without getting lost in all the usual tech world noise and hype.
Exactly. We want to understand how he fundamentally, and you really can't overstate this, changed the music industry forever.
It really is a fascinating narrative, isn't it? That contrast you mentioned, his incredibly reserved, almost, invisible public persona versus the monumental, undeniable global impact he's had is quite remarkable.
Yeah, you don't see him on magazine covers every week.
Not at all. For many people, his name still doesn't ring a bell like, say, a Zuckerberg or a Musk. Yet, arguably, his creation, Spotify, is maybe even more embedded in daily life for millions than some of those other platforms.
That's a really good point.
So this deep dive, it isn't just about admiring the size of the empire he built, the billions and the user numbers. It's really a journey into understanding how his unique, often kind of counterintuitive approach actually fueled that growth.
Right, the how.
Exactly. It's such a compelling case study of someone who started out seemingly genuinely just trying to solve a problem he personally felt, that millions felt.
The piracy thing.
Yeah, the piracy thing. And then, almost incidentally it seems, immense profit became this unexpected byproduct. His story really pushes us to look beyond just the flashy metrics of success and consider the underlying philosophy, the why behind it all.
Okay, so let's really unpack this financial mindset then. Because when we hear billionaire, our minds immediately jump to certain images, right? Lavish lifestyles, private jets, yachts, just really overt displays of wealth.
The stereotype, yeah.
But everything we're learning about Daniel Ek, his approach seems to completely defy that stereotype. So what's really at the core of his financial philosophy? How is it so different?
Well, what's genuinely fascinating, and it comes from him directly, is that his core motivation, he insists, was never about just accumulating personal wealth. He's actually said it quite plainly, something like, I never started Spotify to get rich.
Right.
I started it, he said, to solve a problem I deeply cared about. And that problem, back at the turn of the millennium, was just huge. It was everywhere. Rampant music piracy.
Oh, yeah, I remember those days. Napster, LimeWire.
Exactly. The internet had suddenly made all this music accessible, but legally the options were clunky or expensive or just didn't exist in a user-friendly way. People wanted instant access to huge music libraries, right? But the only platform that really competed with illegal downloads on convenience was the illegal ones.
Yeah, they were just easier, unfortunately.
They were, and X saw that gap. He saw that widespread frustration of millions of music lovers, and he set out to create something seamless, legal, instantly accessible, and critically better than piracy. He wasn't looking at market opportunity charts thinking, how much money can I make? He saw a cultural problem that needed fixing.
So the huge irony then is that by focusing purely on fixing that problem, that massive pain point, we're just providing a better legal alternative. He accidentally ends up with this enormous fortune.
Exactly. It's such a powerful, maybe counterintuitive lesson for anyone starting something, isn't it? Solve a real problem people care about, and value often follows.
Okay, but when we say massive fortune, how massive are we actually talking here? What's the foundation of this wealth? Give us the numbers.
Right, the numbers. Well, according to Bloomberg, their latest estimate, I think it was June 21st, 2025, puts Daniel Ek's net worth at around $7.3 billion.
Wow. Well, okay.
And this huge wealth, it primarily comes from his significant ownership stake in Spotify. He holds roughly 6.2% of the company's shares, mostly through his private investment company, DGE Investments.
So it's almost all Spotify.
Pretty much entirely Spotify. Now, it's worth mentioning Forbes had a slightly different take back in May 2025. They put the number even higher at $9.2 billion.
Why a difference?
Their calculation seems to factor in not just his equity stake, but also his significant voting power. He controls about 37% of the voting rights, which gives him substantial control over the company's strategic direction, you see.
So control matters too.
It does, but whether it's $7.3 billion or $9.2 billion, the really key point, like you said, is that this fortune is almost entirely tied up in the success and the long-term health of Spotify itself.
Right.
It's not like he's diversified massively into real estate or other tech ventures or luxury goods. His wealth is Spotify.
Which brings us perfectly to his compensation structure, right? Because this really highlights that unique ownership mentality you're talking about. It's pretty radical, isn't it, for a CEO of a company this size?
Oh, it's absolutely radical. And this is where his financial thinking really diverges from the typical corporate executive playbook.
How so?
Well, unlike so many high-profile tech CEOs who command these massive fixed salaries, plus huge annual bonuses, plus stock options, plus all sorts of elaborate perks, Daniel Ek has consistently just said no to the traditional paycheck.
So what does he get paid then?
Based on Spotify's own public financial disclosures, he takes no fixed salary as CEO. Zero.
Seriously, none at all.
None. His entire compensation package is structured around long-term performance metrics. We're talking about the fundamental health and growth of Spotify itself. Things like sustained revenue growth over years, the relentless expansion of Spotify's user base across the globe, and, critically, increasing shareholder value over extended periods, not just quarter to quarter.
So what does that actually mean in practice?
The implication is just profound. If Spotify thrives, if it hits its big strategic goals and creates real lasting value, he wins. Big time. His stake becomes more valuable. But if Spotify falters, if the company struggles or fails to meet those long-term objectives, he essentially earns nothing from his role as CEO.
Wow.
And this isn't just some clever financial trick or a PR stunt. It forces him, psychologically and financially, to think not just like an operator running the company day to day, but like a true vested owner. His personal future is completely inextricably linked to the company's trajectory over decades.
It demands incredible discipline, I imagine.
Immense discipline. It fosters an almost unparalleled long-term vision because he has to think long-term, and it ensures this total alignment between the company's enduring health and his personal net worth. Every big strategic decision, every major investment, every difficult cutback, it becomes deeply personal because his own financial well-being hinges entirely on Spotify's success years and years down the line. That's a level of commitment very few executives truly embody.
So he's not just incentivized in the usual way. His motivation is fundamentally baked into the structure. His own success is Spotify's success, long-term. And that deep commitment, that long view, seems to echo in his personal philosophy and lifestyle too, which you hear described as like profoundly minimalist.
Precisely. His whole view of money and success, much like his work ethic, seems really deeply rooted in his Scandinavian upbringing. He grew up in the suburbs of Stockholm, right? And he's cultivated what you can only really describe as a deeply minimalist philosophy, both in his personal life and how he approaches business.
So no Lamborghinis and gold chains.
Definitely not. You genuinely won't find him chasing flashy status symbols or engaging in, conspicuous consumption. He rarely gives interviews, which is frankly amazing for someone running a company of that size and cultural impact. He seems to prefer letting Spotify's products and results do the talking.
Keeps his private life very private.
Intentionally so. His Stockholm apartment is apparently surprisingly simple, understated. And his daily wardrobe is almost legendary plain t-shirts, neutral tones, no designer labels, no fancy suits.
It's not about looking poor, is it? It's about something else.
Exactly. It's not that he's ascetic or against enjoying life. It's more that he seems to view money as a fundamental tool, a means to an end, a resource you use to solve problems, to build something significant, rather than an end in itself or some kind of trophy to be polished and displayed. It's utility and purpose over prestige. And that understated approach really contrasts sharply with the flamboyant image we sometimes associate with tech billionaires.
Okay, and here's where it gets really interesting for me, especially when we talk about how this minimalist, long-term view shapes Spotify's actual financial strategy and its growth.
And
Because this isn't about short-term gains or quick returns, is it?
no, not at all. This deeply ingrained mindset, this long-term focus, it directly shapes how he manages Spotify's finances. Unlike many founders or early investors who might, quite reasonably, cash out some shares when the stock price surges, especially when your company hits a $17 billion valuation, Eek has consistently held onto his shares.
He hasn't sold much.
Very little relative to his total holdings, and maybe even more significantly, rather than distributing profits back to shareholders as dividends, which is often the expectation once a company finally reaches profitability after years in the red.
Which Spotify finally did.
Which Spotify finally did, yeah. Instead, he consistently chooses to reinvest those profits right back into the company, almost as if it were still a scrappy startup in its most aggressive growth phase.
Could you give an example of that reinvestment?
Sure, consider this.
Okay.
In 2024 alone, Spotify poured over $10 billion into licensing and royalty payments.
10 billion. Wow.
Yeah. And this wasn't just, baseline costs to maintain its existing music catalog. This was a massive strategic investment explicitly aimed at scaling its podcast and audiobook ecosystems, aggressively pushing into new audio formats, diversifying beyond music, trying to capture more ear time.
So building for the future, not paying out now.
Exactly. That's a staggering sum, and it clearly signals a long-term play, not a focus on immediate shareholder payouts. Eek isn't trying to build a short-term cash machine that looks good for a quick sale or an acquisition. He is, in essence, building infrastructure, a long-term, comprehensive network designed for total audio dominance, an enduring platform that he clearly envisions lasting for decades.
That's such a different approach compared to the usual tech narrative.
It's rare. It's almost countercultural in today's tech world, which often seems to glorify rapid growth followed by fast exits and lucrative acquisitions. Daniel Ek doesn't seem to want to sell his stake or the company. He wants to stay and scale, continually building something that lasts and genuinely changes the landscape. His vision just extends far beyond typical investment horizons.
That is a fascinating distinction. So thinking about all this, it really feels like Eek's personal philosophy of wealth kind of redefines what billionaire can even mean, doesn't it?
I think it does.
It suggests that true wealth, or at least his version of it, isn't really about just accumulating stuff for its own sake. It's more about the profound impact of the problem you manage to solve and the enduring infrastructure you build to keep solving it. It's about this deep personal commitment to his singular vision, where the financial gain, however huge, is almost just a reflection, maybe the secondary effect, of the immense value created for the world. Okay, so building a $17 billion empire from what started as this quiet idea in a Stockholm apartment. It just sounds incredible, especially when you think about the landscape back when Spotify first launched, what was it, 2008?
Yeah, officially launched in late 2008 in a few European countries.
Right, and back then, Apple's iTunes was just the undisputed king, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Selling songs, selling albums, and music piracy was absolutely everywhere globally.
Rampant. It was the Wild West.
So how on earth did he manage that strategic scaling? What was the breakthrough idea, and how did he navigate such a, well, fiercely competitive and frankly skeptical environment?
You're absolutely right. The market was incredibly crowded and dominated when Spotify showed up. iTunes was the behemoth for buying digital music. Meanwhile, you had these huge illegal file-sharing platforms thriving, Kazaa, LimeWire, Pirate Bay. People were just widely downloading music illegally from peer-to-peer networks. It was the norm for many.
And streaming, was that even a thing then?
Barely. As a concept, it was kind of niche, often seen as unreliable, maybe low-quality audio, buffering issues, But Daniel Ek saw something unique, an insight that most others in the industry, including the giants like Apple, completely missed at the time.
What was it?
He realized that the future of music wasn't going to be about individual ownership of files anymore. It was fundamentally going to be about universal, convenient access.
Access over ownership.
Exactly. Access over ownership. He was willing to bet everything on that singular vision. And make no mistake, it was a massive, high-stakes gamble against a very established, very powerful industry.
So what did that initial model look like? Because it wasn't profitable for ages, right?
No, not for a very long time. Initially, Spotify's business model looked incredibly fragile to almost everyone on the outside. Some called it financial suicide. They were offering millions of tracks legally for free on demand.
Freemium model.
The freemium model, yeah, which was revolutionary for music at the time. But while doing that, they were also committing to paying substantial royalties to this deeply skeptical, very powerful ecosystem of record labels, music publishers, artists. Everyone wanted a piece, and nobody quite trusted this new streaming thing.
So how could that possibly work financially?
It baffled many in the industry. They'd built their empires on selling physical things, CDs, vinyl, or tightly controlled digital downloads via iTunes. But Eek wasn't playing a short game. He wasn't aiming for immediate profit. He had this much longer, much more patient strategy in mind.
Which was
Step 1, aggressively win over users. Get millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people onto the platform by offering an unparalleled, friction-free experience that was simply better than piracy. Make it free, make it easy, make it fast,
took them in.
hook them in. And then, step 2, gradually monetize that massive user base, convert some of the free users to paying premium subscribers over time. Leverage the data insights gathered from listening habits for highly personalized advertising on the free tier, and eventually expand into other audio formats beyond music to capture more listening time and create new revenue streams.
That sounds like a plan, but it requires incredible patience and capital.
Immense patience, foresight, and a willingness to operate at a significant loss for many, many years, constantly raising more investment based on that long-term vision.
And clearly, it eventually paid off.
Ah,
Hugely. But like you said, it took a long time. Years of really painstaking effort, complex negotiations, strategic moves, just to survive, let alone thrive.
yeah.
Can you give us a sense of the sheer scale of that growth and how they finally hit profitability against all those odds?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't an overnight success story by any stretch. That strategy, getting the music, involved literally years of painstaking, often described as brutal, negotiations with every single major record label, every major publisher, countless independent rights holders, each one terrified of losing control and revenue in this new streaming world.
They had to be convinced.
They had to be convinced one by one. Securing those crucial fundraising rounds from venture capitalists and investors who also had to buy into this very long-term, initially unprofitable vision was incredibly challenging too. Plus, just the relentless product refinement, constantly tweaking the app based on user feedback, making it faster, smarter, better.
So what did that translate to in terms of numbers?
Well, its perseverance eventually paid off, and dramatically so. By the end of Q4 2024, so fairly recently, Spotify had reached an absolutely astonishing 678 million monthly active users.
678 million. That's
Yeah.
huge.
It's enormous. And a really significant chunk of those 268 million were paying premium subscribers, people paying a monthly fee for the ad-free experience, offline downloads, etc.
How does that compare to earlier years?
Just to put it in perspective, think back to 2015. Less than a decade earlier, they only had 96 million total users.
Wow, so that's like, what, 7x growth in under 10 years?
Exactly, sevenfold growth. And then look at revenue. For the full year 2024, Spotify reported a staggering $15.7 billion in total revenue. That's roughly 17 billion US dollars, a company record.
Okay, huge growth, huge revenue. But the profitability question always lingered, didn't it?
It did. For years, the narrative was great growth, but can they ever actually make money?
Yeah.
But here's the crucial paradigm-shifting point from that 2024 report. It wasn't just about growth anymore. For the very first time in its entire history, after all those years of operating at a loss, Spotify delivered $1.36 billion in operating profit and $1.14 billion in net income.
They finally did it.
They finally, emphatically did it. This wasn't just a minor win. It definitively proved that for Spotify, scale and profitability were no longer mutually exclusive. They had finally achieved both, silencing a lot of long-standing critics.
That's an incredible turnaround. Going from what so many saw as this financially unsustainable model to massive profitability while still growing users. It really challenges that old idea that you have to pick one or the other, scale or profit.
Yeah.
So what were the absolute key pillars of Eek's strategy that allowed him to pull this off? How did they scale so effectively and build such deep user loyalty at the same time?
Yeah, there were several really critical pillars that formed the bedrock of Spotify's growth strategy. I think the first and maybe the most important was that Eek insisted from day one on keeping Spotify obsessively user-centric.
That term gets thrown around a lot. What did it mean for Spotify?
It wasn't just a buzzword for them. It seemed genuinely embedded in their product development DNA. Think about every major feature they developed, from the now iconic Discover Weekly playlist.
Which felt like magic when it first came out.
It did. It felt like a personal DJ who just knew you. Or the annual viral Spotify Wrapped experience, summarizing your year in music.
Everyone posts those.
Exactly. To integrated lyrics, to the deep, seamless integration of podcasts later on, every single one was meticulously designed with the user experience front and center. The goal was always to create habit, foster sense of discovery, and build this truly personal connection.
Making it sticky?
Incredibly sticky. Spotify wasn't just a utility that played music, it became this personal companion, an intuitive guide. It seemed to understand your mood, your preferred genres, your unique tastes sometimes, it felt like even before you did. And that created incredible loyalty. It made Spotify an indispensable part of millions of people's daily routines. That user obsession was paramount.
Okay, so user obsession is pillar one. What's next?
Second, he made a really bold, quite visionary strategic move to expand aggressively beyond just music into a broader audio ecosystem. He recognized early on that audio consumption was evolving, that people listened to more than just songs.
Podcast bet.
The huge podcast bet. In 2020, Spotify invested over $1 billion in exclusive podcast content. This fundamentally diversified their whole offering.
$1 billion is serious money.
It was a massive statement, and it included acquiring significant companies crucial to the podcasting world, like Anchor, which was a super popular platform for creating and hosting podcasts.
Making it easy for anyone to start one.
Exactly. And renowned content studios like Parcast and Gimlet Media, known for high-quality narrative shows. Plus, they secured these major exclusive deals with huge personalities, bringing Joe Rogan's massive audience exclusively to Spotify, signing deals with Michelle Obama, the Obama's production company.
That caused waves.
Huge waves. And today, that ambitious, expensive investment has clearly paid off. Podcasts now account for over 25% a quarter of all global listening hours on Spotify. It made them a dominant player in this rapidly expanding audio market, and crucially, lessened their sole reliance on the very expensive music licensing deals.
Smart diversification, pillar three.
Third, Eek made a strategic bet on AI and personalization, not just for music recommendations, but as a way to future-proof the platform and unlocked totally new forms of content consumption.
What's an example of that beyond Discover Weekly?
A particularly significant development, which they started rolling out in 2025, was real-time AI-powered language translation for podcasts.
Whoa, okay. How does that work? Is it just like a robotic voice reading a script?
No, that's the breakthrough. This isn't just basic voiceover tech. The AI aims to capture not just the words being spoken, but the speaker's original tone, their emotion, even subtle vocal nuances. The goal is to make a podcast originally recorded in, say, Swedish or Spanish sound as natural and authentic in English as if it were recorded by a native English speaker, using a synthesized voice that mimics the original speaker's style.
That sounds incredibly complex.
Yeah.
And potentially game-changing.
Hugely game-changing. It's not just a flashy gimmick for PR. It's a deeply strategic move designed for expansion at global scale. Imagine creators being able to reach vastly larger non-native audiences almost instantly. It breaks down linguistic barriers for listeners, too. It fundamentally changes how spoken word content can travel across cultures. That's future-proofing through innovation.
Okay, that's huge. Pillar four.
Fourth, surprisingly perhaps, Spotify, despite its massive growth, managed to maintain a relatively lean operational structure for a long time. Unlike many tech firms that get kind of bloated and bureaucratic as they succeed, Eep consciously tried to run the company with a persistent startup mentality.
How did that manifest?
Fostering small, agile teams, the famous squads model, encouraging rapid experimentation, constant iteration on features, valuing speed and learning over rigid processes. And importantly, when the situation demanded it, he wasn't afraid to make really tough, sometimes unpopular calls.
Like the layoffs.
Exactly. That included the very difficult decision to lay off about 17% of the workforce in late 2023. It was a painful move, obviously, but it was done very strategically to streamline operations, cut overhead, and ensure the company was incredibly lean and efficient right before it achieved that critical, long-awaited profitability milestone in 2024. It was a tough but strategic call for long-term financial health.
Right. And the final pillar.
And finally, maybe the boldest move of all, the one that really defined Spotify's entire trajectory, was Eek's insistence on staying fiercely independent.
Despite offers to buy them, presumably.
Oh, absolutely. While the tech giants Apple, Amazon, Google were all pushing their own music ecosystems, often bundling them with other services, and undoubtedly making competitive acquisition feelers or offers over the years, Eek steadfastly refused to sell or merge.
Why? Most founders would jump at that.
He held this deep, almost unshakable conviction that Spotify could and should lead the world in audio, not as just a small feature within a larger tech conglomerate's empire, but as a standalone, category-defining platform totally focused on audio.
Being independent gave them advantages.
Huge advantages. It allowed them to innovate freely just for audio, to prioritize audio in a way no other diversified tech company could, because it wasn't just one division among many. It let them build this truly neutral global platform without being beholden to the competing interests or priorities of a larger parent company. That decision, to stay independent, allowed them to chart their own course and build their own destiny.
So when you lay it all out like that,
Yeah.
what's the core takeaway here for someone listening? Maybe someone trying to build their own thing.
I think it's just a masterclass in strategic patience, isn't it? And remarkable adaptability.
Yeah.
It shows how holding on to a long-term vision, even when it looks incredibly fragile or financially precarious in the short term, can pay off massively in the end. It's about building that solid foundation, constantly iterating based on real user feedback, relentlessly focusing on delivering value, even if it means making some really tough calls along the way to preserve that long-term vision.
It seems to come back to that deep belief in the mission, maybe more than just the market opportunity.
I think that's exactly right.
You know, it's often the unseen stuff, isn't it? The quiet habits, the personal philosophies
Yeah.
that truly define a leader. They shape the decisions and ultimately the legacy. And Daniel Ek, as we've said, he is not your typical loud, self-promoting CEO. He's not constantly in the media. He's not giving flashy TED Talks every other week.
Right. He's almost the anti-CEO in some way.
So what are these quiet behaviors, these maybe unique philosophies that have somehow led to billions in result in this profound transformation of an entire industry? What's going on behind the scenes?
That's a really insightful question because his whole approach is so counter to that popular image of the modern tech leader, the charismatic visionary always on stage. One of Eek's most defining and maybe most unusual habits is his unwavering commitment to what people call deep work.
Deep work, like focused time.
Extremely focused time. He's incredibly disciplined about it. He's known for meticulously blocking out significant chunks of his schedule, sometimes hours, sometimes even entire days, for completely uninterrupted solitary thinking.
Wow.
Yeah. During these periods, apparently, there are absolutely no meetings, no emails pinging, no phone calls, no Slack notifications, just dedicated time for pure focused thought.
That sounds impossible for most people running a huge company.
It seems like it should be. He's even shared anecdotes about retreating into complete silence sometimes, going for maybe 2 or 3 days without speaking to anyone, specifically to mentally model the future, to really think through the long-term trajectory of Spotify, the whole audio industry, trying to predict subtle shifts in consumer behavior or spot emerging technologies before they hit the mainstream.
What does he call that?
He calls this practice mental prototyping, and he apparently considers it his secret weapon, his way of staying years ahead of the curve, allowing him to anticipate trends rather than just reacting to whatever fire needs putting out that day.
Mental prototyping. I like that. Most of us struggle to get an hour without email, so that level of intentional isolation is, yeah, truly remarkable.
It's a superpower in today's world, I think.
It really is. He's actively creating this space to think big, to try and see the future without the constant noise and immediate interruptions that define most executive schedules these days. What else contributes to this sort of unique, almost monastic approach to leadership and innovation?
Well, another core habit that seems to deeply inform his strategic thinking is what you could call fanatical curiosity. His daily information diet is incredibly broad and diverse. It goes way beyond just reading the usual business news or tech blogs.
What kind of stuff does he read?
He apparently delves deeply into things like philosophy books, behavioral science papers, psychology studies, even historical texts. He's trying to understand the deeper currents, I think. But crucially, and maybe most surprisingly for a CEO billionaire, he also immerses himself in direct fan feedback.
Like reading comment sections.
Exactly. He apparently regularly reads granular Reddit threads about Spotify. He scours Twitter comments. He analyzes App Store reviews. He looks at user forums.
Why? Isn't that usually delegated way down?
You'd think so. But he's not doing it for validation, to get praised. He's doing it, as he apparently puts it, to spot patterns. To him, every single user complaint, every seemingly minor bug report someone posts online, every nuanced piece of negative feedback, it's a clue.
A data point.
A vital data point, a piece of the larger puzzle that might reveal an unmet need or a potential blind spot in their strategy or an opportunity for improvement that the internal teams haven't seen yet. This constant, direct, unfiltered feedback loop from actual users fuels his understanding of what's really missing or what could be profoundly improved. It allows him to connect those high-level philosophical ideas with tangible user pain points.
That's fascinating because it's like extreme listening. And this humble, grounded approach, this deliberate minimalism we talked about, it seems to extend beyond just how he gathers information to his personal life and even his leadership style within Spotify itself, right?
Absolutely. It's all consistent. Despite being worth billions, his lifestyle is, as we mentioned, remarkably minimalist. He still lives in Stockholm, in a home described as comfortable but definitely not ostentatious. His wardrobe is famously simple. The plain t-shirts, the neutral tones. You just won't see him sporting luxury watches, driving flashy sports cars, or showcasing extravagant personal assets.
There's that quote you mentioned.
Yeah, the one from a longtime Spotify insider who said something like, "You could walk past Daniel in the office and not even realize he runs the place."
That says a lot.
Yeah.
How does that humility translate into leadership?
Well, it seems to profoundly influence his management style. He actively avoids micromanagement. He prefers instead to hire really capable, high autonomy teams and then empower them to drive their own initiatives and make their own decisions within their areas. He believes strongly in decentralization.
Because he's not dictating everything from the top.
Apparently not. He often conducts walk-and-talk meetings, these informal, one-on-one discussions held while walking through Stockholm's parks or along the city's waterways, rather than sitting in stuffy, formal boardrooms.
Like Steve Jobs used to do.
Exactly. That comparison comes up. He sees his primary role not as having all the answers, which he openly admits he doesn't, but rather as asking the right, incisive questions. Questions that guide his teams toward innovative solutions, that challenge their assumptions, that make sure they're focused on the right problems. It fosters this culture of ownership and independent thought, rather than just talk-down directives.
It really sounds like he has this very intentional, almost ritualistic rhythm to his days, designed specifically to cultivate that clarity and deep insight you're describing.
He absolutely does seem to. His daily rhythm is apparently quite structured to support this unique approach. Every morning, reportedly, without fail, he journals.
Like a diary.
Right.
Or tasks.
More than just tasks. It's not just a superficial to-do list. He seems to use it as a tool for deep introspection, to capture those fleeting thoughts from his quiet time, to explore doubts he might have, to flesh out new ideas that are percolating, and to process complex strategic challenges on paper. It's like a fundamental part of his mental prototyping process we talked about.
Okay. And evenings?
And in the evenings, he often ends his day with long walks. Again, that habit, interestingly, was reportedly directly inspired by Steve Jobs, who was famous for his contemplative strolls.
What's the purpose of the walk for Eek?
For Eek, these walks seem to be a crucial time to just clear his mind, to synthesize all the information he's absorbed during the day, and crucially, to allow insights to surface naturally, away from screens, away from digital distractions, away from the immediate demands of the office. It's often in those moments of quiet movement, apparently, that he connects disparate ideas and finds solutions to problems that seemed intractable when he was staring at them directly.
It's like letting the subconscious work.
Exactly, creating the space for it.
And this raises a really important question, that one I think many of us grapple with in our own lives. Why silence? In a world that just constantly demands our attention, that values nonstop communication, constant connectivity, why does he deliberately build so much silence, so much deliberate space for isolation into his schedule? What's the profound power he finds there?
This is maybe his most counterintuitive habit, isn't it? And frankly, maybe his most powerful. Eck seems to hold this fundamental belief that constant noise, even noise that seems productive, like back-to-back meetings or a relentless barrage of emails or just a constant stream of information flooding in, he believes, that actually kills true vision.
How so?
It drowns out the subtle signals, he thinks. It prevents the kind of deep, interconnected thinking that's required for genuine innovation. It makes it incredibly difficult to step back and engage in real long-term strategic planning when you're constantly putting out fires.
So he forces quiet.
He actively forces quiet into his schedule, week after week, year after year. It's a discipline. And in that profound quiet, he truly listens. He listens to the nascent ideas that are forming in his own mind. He listens for the subtle, almost imperceptible shifts happening in culture and technology. And crucially, He listens for what is still fundamentally missing in the market, missing for the user, missing in their own product.
That's where the insights come from.
That seems to be the idea. It's
Yeah.
in that cultivated, quiet space that he positions himself to see what others, caught up in the daily noise, might miss. It allows him to anticipate future trends and user needs maybe years in advance, letting Spotify pivot or expand or innovate before competitors even realize the landscape has fundamentally changed. These quiet habits, they might not generate flashy headlines or viral tweets, but they have arguably quietly powered one of the most successful, enduring, and transformative tech companies of our time. It's a powerful lesson for all of us, I think, in how to prioritize truly impactful thought over constant activity.
Okay, so beyond the personal habits and the sharp business acumen, Daniel Ek has just undeniably, irrevocably shifted the entire music industry. I mean, from how we listen to how artists even get discovered and build careers. He's left this indelible global mark. What's his philosophy on leadership and maybe long-term thinking that enabled this massive, at times controversial, let's be honest, but ultimately undeniable influence?
Yeah, controversial but undeniable sums it up well sometimes. His overarching philosophy, I think, is beautifully captured in a single powerful belief he seems to hold. Build something that matters, and stay with it long enough to make it last.
Build something that matters, stay with it.
Exactly. And that core principle really sets him apart from many typical Silicon Valley founders, doesn't it? The ones who often seem to be chasing headlines, astronomical valuations, and maybe most importantly, rapid lucrative exits, selling the company for billions and moving on.
Ig plays a different game.
He plays a fundamentally different game entirely. It's the long game.
Yeah.
He's just clearly not interested in becoming a celebrity CEO or a constant public figure. He actively avoids those flashy speeches. He rarely grants interviews. He maintains this remarkably low public profile for someone in his position.
You saw that when they went public, right?
Absolutely. Even when Spotify went public back in 2018, and they did it through a direct listing, which itself was a less traditional, more independent way to go public.
No big IPO roadshow.
Exactly.
Right.
No ringing the bell on Wall Street with huge fanfare. Ake appeared very casually dressed, almost understated, and quietly told investors, essentially, we're just getting started.
Just getting started after building a multi-billion-dollar company about to go public.
Right. But that phrase, just getting started, it's absolutely key to understanding his deep, long-term vision. X seems to view companies not as just financial instruments to be bought and sold quickly, but more like living organisms.
Living organisms.
Yeah. Things that grow, that evolve, that stumble sometimes, that recover, and that need to be nurtured and guided patiently over decades, not just over fiscal quarters to hit the next earnings target. He once expressed this profound desire for Spotify to still matter, to still be a relevant cultural force 50 years from now.
50 years.
50 years. That kind of multi-generational long-term thinking is incredibly rare in a business world that's so often obsessed with immediate IPOs, short-term stock price fluctuations, and quarterly earnings reports. He's clearly playing for a legacy, not just a quick valuation bump.
That distinction is incredibly important. So how does this long game philosophy translate into his actual approach to leadership and maybe the structure of Spotify internally? How does that work day to day?
Well, for Eek, leadership isn't really about personal charisma or being the loudest voice in the room or even being the singular visionary genius who has all the answers. Instead, he seems to believe it's fundamentally about alignment. Alignment. Making sure that everyone within the company, from the most junior software engineer to the most senior executive, clearly sees and understands and is tirelessly striving towards the same ultimate goal, the same North Star for the company.
How does he achieve that in such a big company?
He champions deeply decentralized teams, the famous squads and tribes model Spotify pioneered. He advocates for radical transparency in sharing goals, data, and results across the organization. And he believes in setting clear, compelling missions for each small, autonomous team and then trusting them to figure out the best way to achieve it.
So less top-down command and control.
Much less. Spotify doesn't function like a rigid, traditional top-down pyramid where decisions have to slowly flow up and down the chain of command. It's designed to operate more like a dynamic, interconnected network, fast, flexible, highly responsive to changes and opportunities in the market. This unique structure empowers individuals and teams down the line, fostering a culture of innovation, agility, and a really strong sense of ownership at every level. It's like a living embodiment of his belief in distributed responsibility and trust.
But his deepest philosophy, I think, extends even beyond just Spotify's internal workings or its business model.
Hmm.
If you connect the dots, if you looked at the bigger picture, it seems to be about the very purpose of technology itself.
Okay, how so?
Daniel Ek seems to hold this profound belief that technology should ultimately serve culture, not replace it, not diminish it, but actually
Wow.
amplify it and enrich it.
Technology serving culture. Exactly. And this core conviction is precisely why he has consistently fought to keep human curation alive and central within the Spotify platform, even as their algorithms for recommendation became incredibly powerful and sophisticated over the years.
So it's not just algorithms picking everything.
No. Eck insisted on maintaining things like editorial playlists curated by human music experts with deep genre knowledge, human-made radio shows, carefully handcrafted podcast moments and selections. He wanted to ensure that the human element of discovery, serendipity, and connection was never completely lost to the machine.
He said something about that, didn't he? Data versus soul.
Yeah, he articulated it beautifully once. He said something like, data helps us scale, but soul helps us matter.
That's powerful.
It really is. And that philosophy is arguably why features like the annual Wrapped Experience feel so surprisingly personal and culturally impactful every December, why they go viral globally. It's why so many of us sometimes feel like Spotify's algorithmic playlists just uncannily know our lives or capture a specific mood perfectly. It's because the technology, ideally, is being meticulously designed with human connection, cultural appreciation, and an understanding of nuanced taste baked into its very heart, not just optimizing for clicks.
That's a really powerful distinction. Data for scale, soul for matter. Okay, but what about mistakes? What about setbacks? They're just inevitable when you're building something so massive and trying to disrupt an entire industry. How does his philosophy handle the inevitable challenges and failures that come with such ambitious growth?
That's a great question. He seems to view failure not as some terrible loss, not as something to be avoided at all costs or hidden away in shame, but actually as invaluable feedback, as a necessary component of moving fast and making progress.
So failure is okay.
More than, okay, it's expected if you're pushing boundaries. He actively tells his teams, apparently, something along the lines of, if we're not making mistakes, we're not moving fast enough.
That must create a certain culture.
Absolutely. This mindset, which actively embraces experimentation and calculated risk-taking, has been absolutely crucial in enabling Spotify to constantly try new things, experiment with new audio formats, different ways to monetize, aggressive international growth strategies. Some of their bold bets inevitably flop, right? Like some early attempts at integrating video content didn't really take off as hoped. But others, like that massive podcast expansion we talked about, completely changed the game and diversified their entire business model away from just music. He sees setbacks as vital learning opportunities, not as reasons to retreat or play it safe. And this long-term view, this principled stance, even defines how he seems to handle intense public pressure and major controversies.
Like the Neil Young situation.
Exactly. Take, for instance, that highly publicized controversy in 2022 involving Neil Young and Joni Mitchell protesting certain podcast content on the platform, specifically around Joe Rogan's show and COVID-19 misinformation concerns. When these iconic, legendary artists publicly protested and even pulled their entire music catalogs from Spotify, it created a significant global PR challenge.
Huge pressure. What did Eat do?
He didn't panic or immediately try to pander to the loudest voices or make a knee-jerk decision just to quell the storm. He responded with remarkable clarity and consistency. He wrote public letters reaffirming Spotify's commitment to broad free speech principles for creators on its platform, but also emphasizing the importance of robust content moderation guidelines and providing users with access to clear information and choices.
So trying to balance different principles.
Exactly. It was definitely a controversial stance, drawing criticism from some who felt he didn't go far enough, and praise from others who saw it as defending open dialogue. But crucially, it was entirely consistent with his underlying philosophy. Protect the platform's core principles and its long-term mission as an open audio platform, not just cater to short-term popularity or the demands of a single, albeit very famous, artist relationship. He showed a willingness to endure significant public backlash for what he believed was right for the platform's enduring character and role.
So he chose what he saw as principle over immediate public appeasement, even when facing that kind of backlash from legends. And he certainly faced a lot of pushback, hasn't he? From the very beginning, from the music industry, he was so dramatically changing. How did he manage to overcome all that initial resistance to establish such pervasive influence?
Oh, pushback is an understatement. When Daniel Ek first launched Spotify, the traditional music industry didn't just hesitate, it frankly panicked. They were terrified.
Why exactly?
Well, the major record labels who had built these massive empires over decades, selling physical things like CDs and vinyl, and then tightly controlling digital downloads via iTunes, they feared a catastrophic loss of revenue. Digital downloads were already eroding their profits, and this all-you-can-eat streaming model sounded even worse to them initially.
And artists.
Artists worried intensely about fair royalties. How could pennies per stream possibly replace album sales? And the traditional gatekeepers, radio stations, music television channels like MTV, even CD distributors, they suddenly found themselves facing potential obsolescence. Their role in breaking new artists and controlling distribution was being challenged by a platform where music became instantly accessible everywhere, curated by algorithms and users themselves. They saw Spotify not as a solution, but as a genuine existential threat.
So how did Eek win them over? Or did he just bypass them?
He couldn't bypass them entirely. He needed their music licenses. But he never backed down from his core vision. He held this unwavering belief that universal access was the undeniable future of music consumption, and that ultimate convenience for the listener would win out over the old ownership models every single time. He had to painstakingly, patiently convince an entire, deeply skeptical industry, label by label, publisher by publisher, sometimes artist by artist, that Spotify was not just another threat, but potentially the only viable, scalable solution to rampant global piracy. He had to promise them a new, more sustainable, and ultimately much, much larger revenue stream in the long run, once the model reached scale. He effectively had to rebuild trust and demonstrate value, piece by painful piece. And history has shown he was absolutely right about the potential. Today, Spotify isn't just a player in the audio space. It is the largest audio streaming platform in the world, the undisputed leader by almost any measure.
The numbers again.
Over 678 million users globally. 268 million of those are deeply engaged, paying premium subscribers. A presence in an astounding 184 markets worldwide. The numbers just speak volumes about its sheer reach and cultural penetration.
But the impact goes beyond just numbers, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The true story isn't just in the metrics or the billions in revenue. Daniel Ek didn't just build a huge company. He fundamentally changed the behavior of an entire generation, maybe multiple generations, reshaping how we interact with music and audio daily.
How so? Can you break that down?
Think about it. Before Spotify became ubiquitous, music was predominantly owned, right? Either physically on CDs or vinyl, or digitally as MP3 downloads you kept on your hard drive. Now, for hundreds of millions, it's overwhelmingly streamed on demand. That's a fundamental shift.
Yeah, owning feels almost quaint now for many. What about discovery?
Before, music discovery largely meant listening to the radio, hoping to catch a good song, or buying music magazines, or relying on friends' recommendations. Now, for many, discovery is primarily driven by sophisticated algorithms like Discover Weekly, or by deeply curated playlists tailored to specific moods, activities, or genres playlists, often created by Spotify's own editorial teams or even other users.
And for artists?
The change is arguably even more profound. Before, artists were heavily, almost completely dependent on record labels for recording, distribution, marketing, promotion, getting heard. Now, with Spotify's tools for artists, they can upload their music directly to the platform. They can access real-time analytics on who is listening, where, how often. They can build global fan bases directly from their laptops, often bypassing many of the traditional gatekeepers entirely. Spotify didn't just change how we listen, it profoundly changed who gets heard and how music careers can be built in the 21st century. His influence also extends deeply into bringing data transparency to artists, which was revolutionary. By providing creators with these real-time metrics, things like streams per track, the geographic location of listeners, skip rates, save rates, he essentially brought the same kind of data analytics revolution to the music industry that Google brought to online advertising or search.
So artists know what's working instantly.
Instantly. They no longer have to guess what's connecting with their audience based on vague sales reports weeks later. They know with incredible precision, allowing them to tailor their releases, their tour schedules, their marketing efforts much more effectively. It empowered artists with information in a way they never had before.
But that power, that disruption, it hasn't come without friction, as we mentioned.
No, definitely not. This kind of radical change in concentration of power hasn't been without significant pushback. High-profile artists, from Taylor Swift in the early days to Neil Young more recently, have publicly clashed with Spotify over issues like royalty payment rates, platform ethics, content policies, the perceived value gap. Eek has had to navigate major lawsuits, public protests, artist boycotts, intense regulatory scrutiny in different countries.
Yet Spotify kept growing.
And yet, through all of it, Spotify has consistently grown stronger, demonstrating this remarkable resilience. Why? I think it's partly because Ig understands that true, enduring influence isn't necessarily about being universally liked or avoiding all controversy. It's more about staying relevant, remaining resilient in the face of challenges, and consistently adhering to a set of core principles, even when those principles are unpopular or costly in the short term. He's also just been relentless in expanding Spotify's cultural footprint, consciously moving it beyond just being a music app to becoming the world's leading audio platform. That early, aggressive investment in exclusive podcasting was the first clear signal of that broader ambition.
And looking ahead.
That 2025 rollout of multi-language dubbing for podcasts, powered by that advanced AI we talked about, demonstrates his ongoing commitment to groundbreaking innovation that expands reach. This technology allowing creators to reach audiences across vastly different languages and borders seamlessly, it's about breaking down long-standing cultural barriers. It expands Spotify's global influence even further. It is. Under Eek's quiet but persistent leadership, Spotify has become far more than just a music platform. It's really a sprawling digital media empire, a powerful global cultural driver, and a connector that continues to redefine how we consume audio every day. And Eek himself, once just that shy coder in Stockholm, is now arguably one of the most quietly powerful figures in global entertainment. His influence isn't screaming from the headlines, but it's sort of humming constantly in the background like a perfectly curated playlist, subtly shaping millions of moments, moods, and discoveries on billions of devices in nearly every country on Earth. That's the enduring, understated power of Daniel Ek.
So when we wrap our heads around all of that, what does it really mean for us, for anyone listening? I think Daniel Ek really stands out for this remarkable intentionality, doesn't he? This rare ability to think not just about what can be built with technology, but fundamentally why it should exist at all. What problem does it solve at its absolute core?
Yeah, the why seems central.
It seems to be about playing the longest game possible, with his unwavering integrity, this deep commitment to user value, and an incredible willingness to make unpopular decisions, or wait years and years for profitability if it serves that larger long-term vision. It's quite a different model for success. Hashtags, hashtag key takeaways. Okay, we've taken a really deep dive today into Daniel Ek's remarkable journey. From that quiet, almost invisible teenage coder in Sweden to the architect of this truly global audio empire that touches so many of our lives. And listening back, there are some really powerful, maybe quite practical lessons here for all of us, right? Whether you're actually building a company or maybe just working on a personal passion project or even just trying to navigate your own creative or professional path in this incredibly noisy world.
Absolutely. If you try and distill Daniel Ek's really unique story down, I think a few key lessons emerge that feel pretty universally applicable, regardless of the scale you're working at or what your specific ambition is. So, lesson 1. Ownership matters more than salary. Think about it. Ek became a multi-billionaire not by demanding massive fixed paychecks or chasing stock options like many executives do, but by making this radical, deep, personal bet on his own company's long-term success. His decision to take no base salary CEO, that wasn't just a financial quirk, it was a profound psychological commitment device. It forced him to internalize Spotify's long-term health as completely intertwined with his own. It aligned every single strategic decision he made with creating enduring value, not just hitting short-term quarterly bonus targets.
So how does that apply to us if we're not CEOs?
Yeah. Well, for you listening, this might mean consciously adopting that owner's mindset in whatever you're working on, even if it's not technically yours, whether it's a creative endeavor, a project at work, maybe even a community initiative. Ask yourself, what is my own long-term success, or even just my deep personal fulfillment, dependent entirely on the sustained health and real impact of this single initiative over years? It can radically shift your priorities away from just quick wins towards building something truly sustainable and meaningful. Okay, lesson 2. Build slow to go fast. Spotify didn't just explode overnight into a global sensation. Despite how it might seem now, it took nearly a decade of incredible grit, navigating those incredibly complex, painstaking negotiations with a deeply resistant established industry, meticulously scaling globally, market by painful market. Eek played a profoundly patient game. He focused on building a robust foundation, cultivating long-term relationships with labels and users, even when it meant years and years of operating at a loss.
Patience paid off.
And today, that patience is quite literally paying compound dividends. It proves that true, sustainable, exponential growth often requires a significant upfront investment, not just of money, but of time, perseverance, and sheer resilience before it really takes off. So don't mistake patience for inaction. It can be a powerful strategic force. Lesson 3, think beyond profit. This feels crucial to Ake's story. He never seemed to set out with the singular goal of just making money or achieving some target valuation. His driving force from the beginning was to solve that massive cultural problem, the chaos and frustration of music piracy, by building a legal, convenient, and genuinely compelling alternative that users would actually love and prefer. His core guiding belief that technology should serve culture, not just optimize for clicks or ad revenue, seemed to guide every decision, from product design to content policy to the fundamental values embedded in the platform.
And the profit came later.
The immense profit that eventually followed was arguably a direct result of solving that huge, universal problem with a vastly superior solution, not the initial aim itself. It's a powerful reminder for anyone building anything. Focus on creating real, undeniable value, solve a genuine pain point, and the rewards often follow. Lesson 4. Quiet is a superpower. This one really resonates today, I think. In a world that is just constantly addicted to noise, where everyone seems to be shouting for attention, constantly seeking external validation, flooded with stimuli, Eek's profound embrace of silence and deep introspection stands out as a genuine competitive advantage. He listens far more than he speaks. He dedicates huge amounts of structured time to that deep, uninterrupted thinking, to his mental prototyping, rather than constantly just reacting to the latest urgent email or news notification.
And that silence gives him an edge.
That intentional silence seems instrumental in helping him see what others miss. Anticipating the next big shift in the audio landscape, identifying an unmet user need before it becomes obvious, maybe riding the next wave in an ever-evolving industry, precisely because he was quiet enough to actually hear it coming. For you, cultivating even small moments of genuine quiet thought, away from the constant digital barrage, could be your most powerful tool for clarity and insight. And finally, lesson 5. Stay with what you build. This is perhaps the rarest lesson of all, especially in the fast-paced, often exit-driven culture of the tech world. Eek didn't build Spotify just to sell it off for a quick, massive win. He didn't cash in early and move on to the next hot startup. He chose to stay, to continue nurturing, adapting, and growing the company he founded through all its challenges and transformations. That is an incredibly rare choice for a founder after reaching that level of success.
And the result?
In doing so, he has created not just a financially successful company, but a truly lasting cultural legacy, one that continues to evolve, innovate, and redefine an entire global industry. It shows that true, deep impact often comes from that relentless, enduring commitment to your original creation, seeing it through its full life cycle. Hashtag, tag, outro.
So we've traced Daniel Ek's incredible journey today. From that quiet teenager writing code in Stockholm, to a man who, with remarkable humility, strategic patience, and a belief in the long game, now quietly controls one of the most powerful and culturally embedded media platforms on Earth.
It's quite a trajectory.
His story is just this profound testament, isn't it? Proof that you really don't need to be loud to lead effectively. You don't need to be flashy to win big.
Yeah.
You certainly don't need to follow the conventional crowd or the standard playbook to build something the world will genuinely remember. Something that truly matters and manages to stand the test of time. So the question we really want to leave you with today, the one maybe to reflect on in your own life and work, is this. What are you building that truly matters? What long game are you playing?
Because the richest people often think the quietest thoughts.